Hi, I'm Andy with the San Juan Soil and Water Conservation District in northwest New Mexico. In this backyard conservation workshop video, we'll be looking at managing invasive weeds. While many of the weeds and plants that we're looking at are specific to northwest New Mexico or the American Southwest, the principles or tactics for managing weeds are going to be the same pretty much throughout the world. So first, let's look at strategies for weed management and whether we even need to manage them or not. Also, thank you in advance to those who have let us borrow slides for this presentation. So, are there weeds in this picture? If you're not sure what you're looking at, the purple flowers are Rocky Mountain bee plant, a native plant, and the yellow flowers are our native sunflowers here in New Mexico. So, are there weeds in this picture? We'll get back to that in a second. So, what is a weed? Well, a weed is simply a plant in the wrong place. And if you have a specific goal that you're trying to achieve, such as managing a garden or a farm or a pasture, and there's plants growing in there that you don't want growing, then those plants are weeds. And you might need to start thinking about your management goals and ways that you could manage those issues or, manage the weeds in your garden or farm or agriculture or pasture. There's a quote that a plan without action is a daydream, and action without a plan is a nightmare. So we definitely need a plan, and then we need to follow that plan and take action. But before you take action, define your management goals. Identify the impacts of treating, and also consider the impacts of not treating. Would not treating be able to still benefit your goals, or could not treating also have an impact on your neighbor or nearby properties, their management goals? So you might be wondering, well, what's the difference between a weed and a noxious weed? Well, a noxious weed is a set of specific plants designated by the state, and each state has a different set of plants that they determine as Class A, B, or C. Class A species are those that are very highly or have a high chance of large impact on the economy or agricultural production or wildlife, and that we can still make a difference on managing if we get to them quickly. Now, a noxious weed is specific to the state, so if you're looking at potential grants or funding sources for managing weeds, they may say that it needs to be something on the noxious weed list. So you would look at your state's list to determine what is considered a noxious weed. So back to this picture. On the left, we had the, you don't see the Rocky Mountain bee plant, but you see all the sunflowers there. And what this was basically the backyard of our assistant or our district manager, Melissa May. She was renting a place and the landlord asked her to go take out all the weeds. And so she went and picked a few plants that she thought were weeds, some of the invasive ones or, plants that weren't ideal for that area, but left the Rocky Mountain bee plant and the sunflowers because they're native and beautiful. Well, then the landlord came back and said, wait, why didn't you take out all the weeds? And to the landlord had a different management goal, wanted to use the land for a different purpose. So she wanted all of the weeds gone. So Melissa went back and took out all of the weeds. But a weed is simply a plant that is in the wrong place or that you don't want or that is hindering your management goals. So how do you identify your goals? Well, you've got primary goals and then potentially secondary goals. Your primary goals may be aesthetics. Maybe you have a certain look or a xeriscape or a lawn or something that you want your yard to look like. Or maybe your primary goal is production. If you have a field or a ranch that you're trying to get an amount of production out of. Maybe your identified goal is safety. You're trying to reduce the fire risk around your home or increase the quality of your water drainage or the visibility from your home. Or maybe your management goal is ecological in mind, looking for ways to attract pollinators or native wildlife. So those are all possible primary goals. You may also have secondary goals as well, such as the economic goals, trying to meet your primary goals with minimum inputs of time, labor, and money. Maybe it's regulatory. Maybe someone is telling you, you need to manage these weeds because they're affecting your neighbors or something else. And maybe your secondary goal is EDRR, or early detection and rapid response, trying to prevent the spread of noxious weeds before they become more problematic. And maybe your secondary goal is soil health. A lot of times we refer to farmers as ranchers, but they're actually ranchers of microbiomes and microorganisms, because if you keep your soil healthy, that soil is more conducive for producing good produce and basically more production if you have this healthy soil. So maybe that's your secondary goal, is getting some cover crop growing or healthy root systems and plant diversity and generating a better healthy soil. So obviously these are just some of the goals. You might have others that we have missed, and feel free to share those with us if you like. But first, let's take a look at the impact or the potential impacts of not managing the weeds or the plants that are in your area. For example, here are the sunflowers again on the left, and maybe you like sunflowers in your yard. And so your thought is, okay, my management goal is to have a garden, but maybe I can have a garden in a different spot and still keep the sunflowers there. So if they're not bothering you, then it's not hindering your management goals. But what about your neighbor? Maybe your neighbor also likes sunflowers, and they also don't mind if some of them spread into their yard, and they also enjoy attracting the native pollinators. If that everybody enjoys it, then great. Sit back, relax, enjoy the nature, and enjoy the native sunflowers. However, maybe you've got some bull thistle or musk thistle or Canada thistle, Scotch thistle, or any of those fun thistles that we have out here, and you've got some in your yard, and your neighbor has a big field or has a hay field, and maybe they don't want to be baling thistle up with their alfalfa. Well, now it might be your responsibility to manage the weeds on your property to prevent them from spreading to your neighbor's property. Now, there's a lot of known impacts of noxious weeds, not just the nuisance or, basically getting in the way or spreading through our gardens and fields, but they have other known impacts as well, such as water quantity. The salt cedar and Russian olive that we have in our area is known as a non-native phreatophyte. Basically, it's a plant that takes up a lot of water. Its root systems go deeper than our native plants. It can actually lower the water table, making it harder for our native plants to actually get water and survive. So maybe water quantity is something that you want to address by managing the weeds on your property. Maybe you're trying to improve the water quality. Getting more plants along your riverbanks to prevent erosion so that you have less sediment in the river. Maybe your goal is to reduce fire risk. So the weeds that grow out of control, we know that the Russian thistle, sorry, not Russian thistle, the Russian knapweed, the cheatgrass, both of those can spread like crazy. And when they dry out in the fall and we have those hotter, drier airs and winds, it can be a high fire risk. We also know that the noxious weeds and other weeds can have a major impact on wildlife and diversity. Also, plants and noxious weeds can put toxins into the soil. This is known as allelopathy, where the plants will actually put toxins in the soil to prevent other plants from being able to grow so that only they can grow there. And also it can impact recreation in a lot of different ways. So knowing the impacts of the noxious weeds can help determine or help you decide whether you need to be managing the weeds on your property. Now, once you've decided to manage weeds on your property, you might need to look at a lot of different strategies that could be possible to implement to help manage those weeds. These are just some examples, but you could use controlled burns, tilling or mowing, cultural practices such as having cattle or sheep graze the plants, or having other plants native plants try to outcompete them. You could use chemical control such as herbicides, try reseeding and try to get new seeded plants to outcompete the invasive or noxious weeds. And you can also use biocontrol. There's a few options with some of the invasive weeds and noxious weeds in our area. With salt cedar, the tamarisk beetle has been pretty successful at least helping minimize the impact in some areas of the salt cedar by defoliating it, basically causing it to lose all of its leaves and not be able to really grow and spread that much. Also for the Russian knapweed, there's a nematode that can be beneficial for biocontrol. Also there's a gall fly midge. Basically, the fly midge lays its eggs in the growing stalk of the Russian knapweed. or the spotted knapweed. And then the plant is no longer able to produce a seed or a flower and seed head and can't spread its seed or reproduce that way. So there are some options for biocontrol, so always look into those as an option if you're looking to manage weeds on your property. So we used to call this presentation Getting the Most Bang for Your Buck in Weed Management, but now for this section we like to call it How to Waste Money on Weed Management, because if you're not doing it right, then that's what you're doing. All you're doing is throwing money away for no result or no benefit. So how to waste money on weed treatment once you know you need to treat. Mismatched treatment with the plant, such as spraying at the wrong time, treating annual plants like perennials and vice versa, or choosing a treatment that actually favors the weed over the native competitors. Now, this here, if you're looking for ways to treat certain weeds, is an excellent chart put out by the Montana NRCS, or Natural Resource Conservation Service, that shows on the left-hand side a lot of different ways to manage different weeds or treat different weeds. Up on the top lists a lot of different plants. The ones we have here in northwest New Mexico, primarily on the right half in the green section, including your Canada thistle, field bindweed, leafy spurge, white topper, hoary cress, all of those knapweeds. Let's see, your toad flaxes, salt cedar, and what you don't see in there is also the Russian olive. So the smiley faces just indicate how effective that type of treatment is. Over on the left-hand side, that first one, mowing, you see for what we have here is generally not that effective. There's other methods that are more effective, but also keep in mind some of these methods may be more effective if you combine multiple treatments or treatment styles or management practices together, then they can be more effective. So those are just for treating it individually with that one treatment type. Then you also have hand pulling, herbicide, grazing, revegetation, irrigation, tilling, burning, and biocontrol. Again, that biocontrol is finding animals or critters that will help minimize the spread or even potentially kill the plants that you're trying to get rid of. Couple notes on this. For the field bindweed, I myself have been dealing with field bindweed in our garden for a few years, and I was ripping out handfuls every couple days with no effect, and it just kept coming back again and again. Nothing I could do would help. I wasn't using herbicide. I was trying more of the mechanical methods of treatment. And then about 9 months ago in the fall, after we were done with our last fall harvest, we tilled all of the plant matter back into the soil and just into the top couple inches. And then we planted cover crop seed, watered that, and let that grow up during the rest of the fall and throughout the winter and spring. Anytime it would look like it was getting ready to seed or develop seed heads, we would cut it down a bit and constantly keep encouraging it to just grow the plant and not the seed heads. But the cover crop had been growing in our garden basically from about September through March, April, until we were about to plant our spring planting. And then in the spring, we tilled it under to the first couple inches of the soil, let it sit for a couple weeks, and then planted our early spring garden. And so far this spring and early summer, we have seen about a 90 to 95% reduction in field bindweed in our gardens. So the combination of basically mowing or hand pulling the field bindweed by itself wasn't effective, but combined with the tilling and the revegetation and the irrigation to support the new plants, all of that combined has had a very beneficial or very positive effect in managing the field bindweed. So different plants are going to respond differently, but at least field bindweed, tilling plus cover cropping and watering and caring for the cover crop is an excellent way to manage your field bindweed. This here is a chart just showing the 4 different types of methods: your physical, cultural, biological, or chemical control methods for managing invasive weeds, and different ways that you can apply those based on the site that you're at. Down on the left-hand side, you see the different sites, such as roadside, fence lines, non-crop areas, rangeland pasture, riparian corridors, wilderness, other natural areas, and small infestations. Just some different ideas or suggestions on how to manage those different types of methods in those different areas. Now, keep in mind, when you're managing invasive weeds, you want to use as many different methods as possible. If all you do is one method, it's likely to not be nearly as effective as if you do 2, 3, or even all 4 methods. So try to implement as much as you can that is both time and cost effective. So, how to waste money treating in the wrong season. If you are treating with herbicide or other management practices, if you're, for example, trying to treat halogeton, you need to treat it after it comes up because you don't necessarily know where the seeds are. Once it comes up and you see it, but before it starts producing seed or going to flower and producing seed is the time to treat it. So in the spring and summer is great, but in the fall, once it starts producing flowers, it's too late. It's already spreading, it's putting its energy into the seed. Spraying it at that point is not going to manage it. So you need to look at the life cycle of the plants. Annual plants, you have summer annuals and winter annuals. Your summer annuals, the seeds sprout in the spring, grow through the summer, then produce seed heads in the fall. They spread their seeds, drop their seeds, and then the plant dies. Then the next year, those seeds that they spread come back and grow new plants. Your winter annuals are same type thing, but on a winter schedule. Their seeds sprout in the fall. They grow a little bit in the winter, mostly stay dormant, and then they'll bolt and produce seed heads in the spring. So knowing the life cycle of the plant, and if it's an annual, treating it before it produces the seed head or even the flowers. Make sure that you treat them when they're younger. The younger they are, the more susceptible they are to treatment and the more effective your treatment will be. Also, you need to treat the resprouts or treat the sprouts before they go to seed. Why is because the seeds can persist in the soil for years, so retreating the same location is often necessary until that seed bank is depleted, and every time you let the plants go to seed, you're just restoring that seed bank. Now, for biennial plants, biennial means that they basically live for 2 years and then die. And for example, the musk thistle, during its first year, it's going to be in its rosette phase, which you see on the far picture on the left there. That's all it does for the first year is go from sprouts the seed and grows a rosette. Then it stays as a rosette dormant in the winter, and then in the second year, the rosette goes into bolting up the flower heads and reproduction, and followed by death. So if you're dealing with biennial plants like the musk thistle, you need to treat before they bolt and flower. So when a plant bolts and produces flower heads, for most plants, they are already sending a signal to the rest of the plant to let it die and put all the energy to the seed production. So if you're trying to spray and kill the plant when it's already sending its own chemical to the plant to die off, and it's going to be putting its energy into seed production, you're not actually really doing much. It's still going to finish that seed production cycle, and it's still going to spread the seeds. So if you see musk thistle with purple flowers on it, it's already too late to spray. It will produce seeds even after you spray. So instead, your option would be mechanical removal, removing those plants carefully so that you don't drop and spread all the seeds and bagging up all of the flowers. Basically removing those seeds from the plant before they're able to be dropped and go into the ground. Again, those seeds can persist in the soil for years, so you may have to keep retreating the same location until you deplete that seed bank. Now, perennial plants. Perennials are able to regrow from their root system and live for many years. These ones are, while they are producing seeds, they don't need the seeds to continue growing and regrow each year. So you have to actually treat them at two different stages. One, you want to try to minimize the amount of seed production so that they don't spread the seeds. Two, you need to also kill the root system so that the roots just don't regenerate new plants the next year, or keep growing more plants. One example of this is the Russian knapweed. If you treat it in the spring, just treating it in the spring and not treating it in the fall as well is not going to be effective. If you treat it in the spring, great, kill it before it can produce seeds, but know that it's going to keep coming back from that root system. Then in the fall, you're going to spray the plant, and you're going to, as it's starting to kind of dry out, you spray the plant and it pulls that herbicide down into the roots, killing the whole root system. So Russian knapweed is a really tough one to control because it can regrow so many different ways, both from seeds and from roots. So with perennial plants, you often are going to need to be treating and retreating the same plants or the same areas due to regrowth from the roots or new seeds sprouting up that are in the seed bank or that have been dropped by the plant. The optimal time to spray, if you're using herbicide, is when the plant is above ground portions are dying back, bringing their energy into the roots for winter. So, when to treat? Annuals, you're going to treat them. For your summer annuals, you're going to treat them in the spring and summer. Your winter annuals, you're going to treat them in the fall and winter. Your biennials are going to be treating them in the spring or in the winter if they're just in the rosette form. And your perennials, you're going to be treating both in the spring and the summer and the fall. Remember, you need to treat it both to prevent it from spreading seeds and prevent the perennials from being able to regenerate from their roots. So you have to kill that root system under the ground. So other ways to waste money on weed treatment: mistaken identity, spraying the wrong plant, killing of non-target species, potentially due to drift, or which can happen with boom spraying, or only IDing and treating some stages of the life cycle of the plant. Here's a case of mistaken identity and indiscriminate treatment. Here are the target species. You see the halogeton there. But you notice all the green area, treated area, with the dye that you see the left behind by the herbicide, that was the treated area. Yet we don't see the halogeton in the weeds in that area. So the spray isn't going to be very effective for treating halogeton. Making sure that you identify the correct plants and the correct areas for treating is extremely important if you want to save money or use money appropriately or responsibly when treating weeds. Also, only treating some life stages. On the right there, we see the Russian knapweed. On the left, we see one of the thistles and some halogeton. And if you only treat the adults and you leave the babies for later, well, that's your job is to spray herbicide and treat plants, maybe that's job security because those little babies are going to grow up to be big adult plants too. But if you are trying to cost effectively manage your weeds, then leaving those little plants behind, well, that's just ensuring that you get to keep spending money on weed treatment. So if you're trying to waste money, that's one way to do it. Also, incomplete treatment, leaving the roots behind to resprout, as we talked about, only killing some plants or leaving some behind for a seed source, or ignoring infestations because they're small. So, because they're small, and all of this is important, especially for our Class A noxious weeds, because we don't have a lot on them yet. So when we do find those noxious weeds on the Class A list, such as the black henbane or the leafy spurge, we apply the early detection rapid response. We treat them swiftly and make sure to treat them appropriately so that we can, as quickly and effectively as possible, eradicate them or prevent them from spreading further. Also, you can waste money by not applying herbicide correctly or reading the label. Spraying at the wrong rate, too light might not kill the herbs. Spraying at the wrong rate, too heavy, might waste your chemical and waste your money. Spraying the wrong type of herbicide might not even treat what you're trying to get rid of. Spraying then it getting rained on or getting too hot is a great way to flush your herbicide away or let it evaporate or volatilize into the air and drift away. There's also potential for tank mixing errors, such as not using proper surfactants or using too hard of water, or your tank was dirty, or the chemical was left in the tank for too long. There's a lot of ways you can waste money by not using herbicide properly. The number one thing is read the label. Also, before you spray, you need to recognize that there are known impacts of weed management and herbicide use. One is herbicide resistance. The more we spray a particular herbicide, the more potential that that plant has to develop a resistance to that herbicide. That's one of the reasons that we want to use all of the methods of weed management, not just one. Your biological control, chemical control, physical control, or cultural control are all needing to be implemented to have the best possible results for the longest time possible. Also, there is a potential to harm non-target plant and animal species. There's also the potential for erosion from bare ground. If you spray weeds and then you don't put anything else to grow there, when it rains, that land is now barren and it's just going to wash away. There may be other unintended consequences, including potential loss of money due or less of economic revenue due to spraying. And you may even, if you use a wrong type of herbicide, leave a residue in your soil that now prevents you from growing what you want to grow. So again, it's about reading the label. The label on herbicides, if you decide to go that route, will tell you everything you need to know in order to apply it properly. How to mix it, how to apply it, when not to apply it, and this will help you make sure that you're using it both effectively and legally. Know that the labels on herbicides are legally binding and you need to follow the instructions at all times. Also, know that it'll give you instructions on mixing or adjuvants that might be needed, such as weak acid herbicides might need to have an ammonium sulfate to make up for hard water. That's because hard water basically has cations that will bind to your negatively charged weak acid herbicides and causing them to be less effective. You don't need to know all the details, but just know that here in Northwest New Mexico and most of the American Southwest, we typically have very alkali soils, which leads to very hard water, which leads to less effective herbicides if they're a weak acid herbicide. So you need to adjust for that by using ammonium sulfate. Now, before you apply ammonium sulfate to your water, you need to know how hard it is. So you need to make sure you do tests using test strips or titration kits or sending your water off to a lab for analysis. And if your water is hard, add conditioner or ammonium sulfate to your tank prior to adding the herbicide. That will help mitigate the adverse effects of the hard water on the weak acid herbicides. Just for a quick example of what it looks like if you do or don't use hard water or you accounting for hard water. This is some broadleaf plantain. The left one is not treated at all, so it grew just fine. The middle one was treated with 2,4-D that was mixed with hard water, and it grew just as fine. The hard water binded, or the cations in the hard water bound with the acid in the 2,4-D, making it ineffective. Then on the right, it's 2,4-D that was mixed with hard water that had been treated with ammonium sulfate to account for the hardness. The 2,4-D, as you can see, was much more effective, reducing the root growth and plant growth of that broadleaf plantain. So, while you might not be mixing huge batches of herbicide here in Northwest New Mexico, this is available for you. Now keep in mind, some of these test results may not be up to date anymore, and you should always make sure to do your own test before mixing your ammonium sulfate, and also be sure to follow all local, state, and federal laws and regulations. Basically, what this chart is showing is how much ammonium sulfate you would need to add to your per 100 gallons of tank mixture to account for the hardness in the water. So it's showing you how we calculated how much ammonium sulfate needed to be added, and feel free to use those numbers. But again, always test your water first, make sure that it still matches, and make sure if you don't know how to calculate the amount of ammonium sulfate, contact us or another professional that knows how to properly calculate the amount of ammonium sulfate you need. So, other ways to waste money on weed management or weed treatment. If it's a lost cause, if there's no chance of getting rid of the whole infestation. So again, if you remember our discussion about what was a weed versus a noxious weed, the noxious weed list is plants that have been identified by the state that have a negative economic impact and that can have a potential for being reduced or managed. The reason some plants that you might consider noxious weeds, such as Russian thistle, puncture vine, things like that, are not on the noxious weed list is because they're so prevalent and spread throughout the region that there's no way we're going to get rid of them at this point. Tumbleweed, I mean, that is everywhere throughout the American Southwest, and we're not going to be able to get rid of it no matter how much money and herbicide we throw at it. So, when to treat and what you should expect out of your weed management practices. If you look on the right-hand side, if the plant is very restricted, there's only a few of them there, we're using that EDRR, Early Detection Rapid Response, to try to reduce the spread before they get out of control. However, once they have become widespread, like on the left there in the yellow area, all we're simply trying to do is reduce the impact. We're not going to be able to really reduce the spread or reduce that weed's prevalence. So again, here is that list of troublesome weeds of New Mexico. You can see the Class A and Class C species there. For the entire list and for this booklet, you can access it through New Mexico State County Extension Office or Cooperative Extension Service. We also have it on our website available for download if you would like it. Again, our website is sanjuanswcd.com. So finally, how to waste money on weed treatment if the cure is worse than the disease. Effects of the treatment worse for management goals than the weeds were, basically if the costs outweigh the benefits. So you're going to have to constantly compare the cost of managing those weeds with the negative effects that those weeds are inflicting or negative impacts that those weeds are applying to your management goals. So it's a give and take, and you got to find that balance. If you spend all of your money on weed management, well, you just spent all of your money and now you didn't make a profit. But most importantly, it's not just about treating your own individual weeds or your own individual goals. We're all in this together. We're all trying to manage these weeds, and the more we can work together, the more effective it'll be. If only public landowners treat for weeds, but private landowners don't, the weeds will continue to spread. So this is a list of here in San Juan County of just some of the groups and organizations that all work together to try to manage invasive weeds. Again, once you decide you're going to treat, go back to those lists of types of mechanical treatments, biocontrol treatments, chemical or cultural treatments, and try to implement and use as many as you can effectively. The more you can and the more you can change what you're doing, the more or the better the effect will be in the long run to be able to keep the weeds from adapting to one single treatment method. So, how to save money on weed treatment. 1, set your management goals. Select a combination of management strategies that meet your goals. Remember to evaluate the impacts of your management. If you just treat and you don't look and see how effective it was, you don't really know if you actually used that money wisely and if doing it again the next year will be beneficial or not. Focus time and money where you can make the most difference. Identify your plants. Make sure you're treating the correct plants and only the weeds that are causing you harm to your management goals. Keep non-target species safe and identify and treat weeds at all stages of life. Don't leave those babies back for the possibility of returning later on and producing seeds. Make sure to match the treatment with the plant species, spraying at the right time, treating annual and perennials appropriately, and choosing a treatment that restores the advantage of native competitors. Read the herbicide label. Choose herbicide and timing based on target species. Spray at the correct rate. Delay treatment if weather isn't right. Also, make sure you mix the tank carefully. Follow label and use a trusted water source to avoid ruining your herbicide before it ever gets to the plant, and use tank mix promptly. Don't let it sit around and become inert. Again, be sure to follow all the label instructions and all local, state, and federal regulations and laws. And finally, treat completely. Mechanically remove roots or use systemic herbicides to avoid resprouting. Don't leave behind a seed source, and aggressively treat infestations when they're small. Again, the recipe for success is all of us working together to keep each other's management goals in mind. Thank you for watching this Backyard Conservation Workshop video on invasive weed management. If you have any questions, comments, or you would like more materials on this, go to our website at sanjuanswcd.com. Go to resources, and in Backyard Conservation Workshops, you'll find lots of materials, including that noxious weed booklet and other downloadable materials for your information and for your use. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to reach out to us through our website. Thank you very much, and I hope you enjoyed this and found it useful.